This is the January 2014 meeting of FM Walleyes. Now here's the president of FM Walleyes, Scotty Brewer.
Interrupt me, interrupt him. Let us know if we need to talk louder because we don't have any microphones. So welcome all you guys for coming tonight. We appreciate you coming out in this blustery weather. Man, that didn't work as well as I hoped. Thank you all for coming. All right. That's pretty much it for the announcements for this month. Next month, February, who's our speaker in February? Eric Olson, Ranger. Ranger is bringing in Eric. Eric was here a couple of years ago. He did a very, very good job a couple of years ago, a seminar. Talked a lot about slow death, talked a lot about Lake Oahe. I think he just won an Oahe tournament at that time. He's a good speaker, so you'll want to come back in February. But for now, let's get going here. As the reason why you guys all made it here tonight. It certainly wasn't here to see me. And unfortunately, it probably wasn't here to see the next guy I'm going to bring up, but let's bring up Tyler. Tyler is going to introduce our speaker tonight. Thank you very much, Tyler. And I think before Tyler starts, we should give Tyler a round of applause because he's been working really, really hard to bring in these speakers, and he's doing a really good job at it. So I think we should give him a little
Thank you all for coming with this lovely weather we're having. I'd like to introduce you guys to Brett Setterholm. He runs one of the best guide operations out of Perham. He covers all the Ottertail lakes, and you are guaranteed probably not going to find a better fisherman in the Ottertail Lake area. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Brett Setterholm.
Like you said, this beautiful weather, it's getting to be long already, but to pull out the tournament shirt today in January was a little different, but I don't know, I think the dryer shrunk it a little bit, that's what I blamed on. But anyways, when he talked to me originally, we tried to set up something last year, it really didn't work, but very honored to be here. We talked earlier, and what your guys' group is just amazing how big it's gotten. So to come here and speak, I do a lot of speaking around the Perham area for Hoot Sports. We have seminars through March, through just about every weekend. And when he called me up, it was an honor to come up here and to talk to guys that also have the love of the sport. But as he asked me to speak, I thought, okay, what am I going to come up here and do? And mostly in my seminars, I'll bring, your rods and everything you use, and the rigs and the bottom bouncers and everything else. Well, I thought about it. You guys have probably been, taught to death on that. So I thought what I'm going to do is talk about my knowledge on the area lakes that I fish, and fish a lot. There's such lakes as, I'll go through West Battle, everything, Rush Lake, Big and Little Pine, and of course Ottertail is one of probably the best in our areas. Talk about West Battle, you've probably heard about this. This lake is a lake that really is kind of a equalizer for a lot of walleye guys because it's tough. I kind of grew up on this lake. We have it's very deep structure, compared to what I fish. I usually like a lot of shallow stuff, but typically right now, even in the winter when guys are going out, it's not what you're used to. We set up our permanents or whatever in over 40 feet of water, but that's just where they roam, and I'll go through why the clarity. It's a very, very clear lake. As they call it, a sucky disc or whatever it is, it's 18 some feet, 19 some feet. So the light penetration down there is unbelievable, and it runs like that. It's probably one of the clearest lakes right around that area. But I mean, we have hardly any bloom in that lake as far as in your July as well, where, you know, a lot of lakes turn green. This weed line in this lake can run down to 26, 27 feet, sometimes even 28. So your typical, when you talk about people running, you know, work the weed edges, it's all different here. You're working almost in 30 feet on outside of it. So, but it's, you know, when you work those edges, it's got pretty much typical inside, outside corners. You know, but that's the thing, it's going to push you out deeper, and a lot of people say, you know, man, that's pretty deep. Low reproduction, the reason I have that up there is because they talk about in this lake is that there's not a lot of spawning that goes on in this lake. Now this has great big fish, but the DNR has suggested that when you catch a big fish there, obviously we want to put it back, but they said that fish typically is not going to reproduce. The reason why is there's not a lot of rock structure. The rivers that come into that are fairly small, and they're shallow that run into this lake. You know, like Ottertail, you have, you know, a big inlet, big outlet where they run up to Walker, where they do all the stripping on them. This lake really doesn't have that, because right when you go in, the river that flows in from like East Battle, I mean, there's a huge sandbar out there, and it's really, I mean, it's like ankle deep sometimes. So it could be, they tell us there's not a lot of reproduction in that. So what I see changing in this lake over the tournaments and guiding, the fingerling stocking, I have equals more weed walleyes. Well, what we found is, our theory is that we're finding a lot more now up in those weeds. In fact, the tournament last year was one up in the weeds, but I think those things, those fingerlings, are released. They hide in those weeds, they stay in the weeds. I have grown up on that lake, you know, ever since I was just knee high, and we've never fished the weeds like we have now as hard. Jigging, pulling a lot of, you know, the split shots and spinners over the top, but there's a lot of rock bass. It's just unbelievable in this lake. Perch, but of course using your even artificial crawlers works really well. But it started to change, and typically years ago, I mean, you wouldn't see anybody really fishing those that shallow, but now we're talking, when I talk shallow, I'm talking 10 to 15 feet compared to 27, 40 some feet. One year it was 157 pounds brought it in, and that was when the slot was, where you had 1/24, but and that was in a 2-day tournament, and that was pretty good. That was what we were catching, is the big fish. I was telling someone just the other day, I have a, if you come in earlier, I had a picture up, we just had a recent fight, he got a 27 and a 29 back-to-back ice fishing. So if you get down in this area, it's a great lake to fish. Some of the methods: rigging with long snells. Everybody knows, you know, how to rig. But when I'm talking rigging with long snells, I'm talking 12 footers. And typically, when you're sitting there and you rig with a 12 footer, you know, to get that fish in the boat, you know, you have to stand on the edge, you're lifting up, trying to have someone net it. But one of the tricks that I use, and some of you may too, but whenever I fish this lake, I'll run your typical long snell, your swivel, and then I'll have a bead or like a bobber stop. And what I'll do with that bobber stop is I have it right above my swivel, and I can move that. You know, I'll have my, let me back up. My snell will be about 4 to 5 feet, and then I take that bobber stop and I go all 6, or you can have it however long you want. So you can adjust that snell. Okay, so when you go running the crawlers with that long snell, I usually, you put a little puff bear in them, bring them up, or leeches. But when you get a fish, and you're reeling it in, when you get that sinker to the end, that'll reel right down, almost right down to that swivel. So that's one of the tricks we use when we run real long snells. Because typically when you run that long a snell, there's no way it's going to be too hard to obviously net the fish with a 12-foot snell. This is what I found out really works for me, is using a light pound snells. I'll use 2 to 4 pound test on this. It works for me. It works obviously better with that light snell, that light wire cluck, with a leech. That leech can swim a lot better. A blown up crawler can float better. So that's just typically, and it's a lot of guys, they just shake their heads when they go through going that light. Leeches are the best bait on this lake. Typically now, when we see those big fish, I use the mediums or the small leeches. Everybody buys the jumbos. When you go to buy those jumbos, they're usually, and then you look in the mediums, look at the difference ones, especially when they stretch out stuff. There's not a lot. Price-wise too, there's a little bit of a difference there too. But I run medium leeches or small leeches, and I have caught more big walleyes fishing with smaller leeches. And especially on a finicky bite, it's just been, I don't know if they think that's just a small meal and they slurp it up, but typically a smaller leech works better for me. Rush Lake moving back. I actually live on the north side of Rush Lake. I really like this lake. I think there's a lot of people that talk, a lot of people that come up. It's all those lakes around there. It's whole bit, when we go from West Battle to the Clarity, you go to Rush Lake. Rush Lake is a staying lake. It's not. It's if you go out, walk out in the summer, it's kind of a. My dad would say loon shit, but it's the mucky stuff, excuse my language, but anyway, I was using his words. Anyways, it's kind of the more silty stuff, where West Battle is pure sand, pretty much anywhere you go, but Rush Lake is more of that silt, so it's got a lot more growth. But it's a very fertile lake. Stain water I have up, we went through that. It's well vegetated. Anywhere you go to that east end, you pull out and you pretty much have the reeds sticking out through that east end. When you launch down there, when you drive out, you can see reeds all over. And there's not a lot in the east end as far as there's some structure there, but it's pretty well, there's weeds anywhere you go down in the east end, and I'll have pictures of that later, and I'll show you what I mean of that. West end holds majority of the walleye population. If you're going to fish Rush Lake, if you know what I'm talking about, it's a 78. They just redid 78, and they put in new culvert, or would you say a bridge there, okay? Beautiful access there, and that is holds most of your walleyes, and there's a ton of structure out there, and there's a lot of places to catch fish. We held a tournament out there this year, and I believe in one area is quite a stretch. I think 200-something pounds come out of just one stretch, but I mean it's a great lake. Weed line now, that's different. See, now we have 16 to 17 feet, and that's with the 17 feet. I think it's kind of pushing a little bit, but I have found them in 17 feet. But typically it's right around, maybe 14 to 16. But at 17, you can find them there. This weed line is not like, I mean, it's a weed line, and it's growth. I mean, it's coming up 3-4 feet. And when you fish the weed edge, it's the weed edge, you know, where it's not the sandgrass coming up it, you know. So it's a definite, when you're in the weeds, you're in the weeds, you're hung up. Methods, rigging, bouncing. This, I wouldn't suggest having that real light line. There's a ton of gators in this place. A lot of northerns, which is good. But doing a lot of bottom bouncing too. But that's typically, for me, the best bites I found on that lake is rigging and bottom bouncing. Note, as I'll say again, that bottom bouncing is my least favorite thing to do with clients and myself. Least favorite. There's other guys around that just bounce and bounce and bounce and bounce. To me, when I take people out, I want that rod. Sometimes they'll put the bottom bouncers in. You'll see some other guys going by. The clients are sitting there. You know, there's fish. You know, they kind of set themselves, which is okay if you have real novice. But I want that rod in that person's hand. And when I'm running a 3 ounce, that gets heavy after a while. I want them rigging, and when they get that bite, I want them feeding. Some of the things that we all grew up in here with, you know, the typical bite, feed them, get the bail set, doing all that. But spring, and you guys come up in this area, front of the river, probably one of the best bites opening weekend. Comes out, if you know the area, St. Lawrence Church is there, it feeds out into Rush Lake. And it's not bound bad, but anywhere out in that area, those fish come, and that is, I mean, everybody, a lot of friends of mine, besides even Ottertail, they hit Rush right away in the spring. That's typically, that's kind of the word there. Everybody's headed to Rush. You know, in front of the river, not anchored. It's a long flat out there, and just the break out there, and anywhere along there, and it seems like it's just all along, and people do really well on opener on Rush Lake.
How is it now for winter ice fishing? Can a guy go there and catch some fish?
It's good, but it seemed like it shut down just about right after Christmas. It was a really good bite right away. Rush Lake, when you put out, I had my permanent house out on Thanksgiving Day, I put it out, which Ottertail still had open water. West Battle was wide open, and it typically gets ice first, so. Night crawlers, bait of choice in midsummer. And this is my bait of choice, but you know, when you take people out and you're going to these different lakes, you just find out, and it's weird, but it's like this lake is good for night crawlers, this good for leeches, and it just seems like night crawlers are the best, and it's for this lake. And early too. Big and Little Pine, I think a lot of you are familiar with this. Kind of some of my favorites here. This lake, it seems like I can go through, you know, right away, all the way through, it's a good bite. This lake has some darker stained water. The walleyes look, you know, kind of really neat in there, a little darker, not really, you know, the Canadian, but when it comes, and I'll talk about it with the bloom, it really gets icky, but you know, you see different walleyes, and like West Battle, they're lighter. This is really, you know, darker walleyes in this, from the stained water. High bloom late July. Now, like myself, I don't like cleaning my boat 100 times, but when you get into late July, that lake really blooms. And I'm talking, there's scum, okay? Not all over the lake, when you launch it stuff. And if you're familiar with the green stuff that sits on top, you launch, you come out, you're cleaning, and that stuff sticks by the time you get home, but it really gets bad sometimes. Weed line, 12 to 14 feet in this lake. Definite cutoff again, that's typically where it runs. Great population of walleyes. If you have not been there, I think my next one is, maybe it is a slot. Yeah. They put a slot on it, 18 to 26 has got to go back. Okay, if you really want to catch some nice fish, and you're not into taking fish home to eat, go to one of these lakes. Okay? And I'm high concentration of 20 to 24 inch walleyes. Jig and shallow. Now we're starting to do what I like to do. Jig and shallow when you're going up, a lot of places on Big Pine Lake have where the weeds don't grow. It's kind of not like sandgrass, but it's a little bit thicker. But I like ripping that jig over those weeds. And I just pitch that thing behind the boat, shiner, minnow, whatever it may be, and I just start ripping that thing. And I rip it. And I'm using about a 16th ounce to 1/8 ounce. And you're usually going about 1.5 miles an hour with that, and you just rip that jig. And the key is, you know, you rip and you let that fall back. You're not just throwing your rod back. You're ripping, you let it fall back. You rip, you fall back. And 90% of that time, that bite is on, you know, when it falls back. So if you can imagine when that rip, the jig is shooting up, and then when you release the line, it stops, and then it's just staggered, kind of falls. Maybe look like a stunned bait. But if you've done any rip jigging, and this thing has gone on, I mean, everybody's starting to, you know, do it. I'm seeing more rip jiggers go on than I've ever seen in a long time. But I mean, there was quite a few people that were placing, and they're people figuring out. But that ripping that jig, and Big and Little Pine, there's a lot of flats and a lot of areas that you go up there and you'll find fish in these, you know, maybe even shallower, 4 feet. But you pitch it all as far as you can, and then just rip that jig. And there's different colors in that jig too. I happen to like the Vegas glitter jig on that lake. Must be the flash, I don't know. It just does, it's one of the better jigs for me on that lake. Pulling crankbaits, I don't really do it that much, but you see a lot of vacationers doing it all day long out there, and they're catching fish. They call it the river flat. They're out there, and it's an easy way to fish, and those people are pulling all day long, and they're catching fish. You see them net fish. Pulling crankbaits, long line, and just shallow runners. That's kind of one of the lakes around that you see the most crankbaiters doing during the day. Rigging, of course. This, it doesn't really seem to matter really with this, you know, I didn't really put up the size and weight, typical 6 to 8 pound. I think that water is just kind of more dingy, that hook color, anything doesn't matter, but leeches, comes up leeches and crawlers, okay? Now we start getting a little bit with the red tail, start working a little better for this lake. But leeches and crawlers it's another good lake for that. All right. Now, of course, my favorite, and a lot of people have heard about this and fished this, Ottertail Lake. I have on here, of course, it's a different animal. Okay? This lake, you can do just about anything out there and catch a walleye. Now, I say that because some people are like, well, really? I mean, you see people doing everything. Cranking, rigging, bouncing, lead coring, when they, you name it. Strip these things, the walleyes, do the walleye stripping. I mean, there's constantly 25 to 26 to 27 inch walleyes. You know, word gets around, these guys are coming to town, and where are these fish? Well, all the tournament guys say, you know, there's every tournament, there's not, you know, there's a few 25s and 26s coming in, but these things, as they call it, they're going to crack the code, you know. They've got to be hanging out there. And we see guys pulling lead core all around out there, and then pretty soon, you know, tournament day come and they weren't doing it because it just didn't work. But that's a technique that they do. I think that's a more fall thing on that lake. You'll see some guys lead coring out there, but and that's tough too, because the reason it's tough to lead core on that lake is there's so much contour. You can be driving along and all of a sudden it could come up to 6-8 feet in the middle of the lake too, you know, so a lot of flat. So you got to really, you'd have to be driving all over. Shallow, medium, deep structure. You could fish anything, which most lakes, but it can be good in this lake. And in one day you could go out there and say, you know, I'm going to fish shallow now, I'm going to fish, you know, weed break, now I can go deep structure. Okay, and they'll be in any place that you go. Flats, you know, flats, humps, what I call the moguls. And I'm going to bring up a Lake Master map here, and I'll go through that and we'll talk about it. I call them moguls because one thing on this lake is up on these flats, you can be out there and you could be pitching to, you could be in 6 feet of water, and you know by that wall there could be a 2-foot depth, could be 8 feet there. And those fish will lay in that trough, and it'll run, and it could be a certain reason they're in there. Could be some gravel in there, could be a little different weeds, but they'll be stuck up on this flat midday. And those walleyes will be, all you have to do is pitch your jig in there. Now most of the time we'll take and, you know, we'll still do the rip jigging over these, and you'll rip jig through it, you go up and over, and then you find the next trough, you know. If you're out there a lot, and I'll show you on the map how you can find these spots, but, you know, you have your different waypoints all the way around that you follow, of course, and it helps. But we call them moguls. Are there moguls up there? And a lot of tournament guys in Ottertail know, yeah, there's a slight, you know, just a slight 2-foot depth change, 1.5 feet, and those walleyes seem like either they get caught up there all at night, you know, and a lot of times you're baffled. You're like, you got them where? Yeah, I got them right up on Belmont Flat, middle of the day. It's like, really? You know, what are they doing up there? Well, obviously there's probably bait up there, but rocks, a lot of rock piles out there. It was interesting that a few years ago we had a low water level. Well, the Lakeshore Association called a lot of the guys, because a lot of the guys know where a lot of the rock piles were. Well, for safety reasons, they wanted to mark all these rock piles. You know, they're coming up almost, you know, 4 feet in the middle of the lake. I mean, they're not bad, but, and when they called, I was like, yeah, you know, safety reason, I don't want anybody to get hurt. Well, when word got out, you know, a lot of tournament guys like, no, don't be giving out those rock piles up, you know. So, anyways, there's a lot of them that are not dangerous, but this was a while ago, and there's a lot of rock pile and a lot of rock structure out there that, you know, a lot of people don't even know about, you know, and every once in a while I'm still finding some different spots, even real deep humps, just, you know, 28, 32 footers. It's like, you know, you feel that? Yeah, you know, oh, there's some gravel on it, or some rocks on it, you know, so. Wind-driven lake, okay? We'll look at the map, wind-driven. I like to have 2 days of good hard wind blowing into some end, and it doesn't matter to me if I'm fishing clients or tournament and it's blowing from the south for 2 days and it switches to the north. I'm fishing that north side because I feel that I still have great success. That is still turned up enough on that side of the lake that, you know, I think there's always an effect that it blows into plankton, blows into bait, that brings in the predator fish. So, you know, even though it's laid down, there's still enough that's pushed up in there, and there's still good bite. Obviously the wind side, I like a good 2 days on this lake to really get that side going where I want to fish. Now I'm not talking, you know, you're going to go out and it's not going to be unsafe, but I always like that wind-driven side on that, and it seems to be a better bite. Sometimes heading out in the morning, you have it all planned, you got your spots, like for a tournament, and I'll be driving out, my partner's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm going over there. So, you know, we'll save our point spot A here until, you know, we know that there are probably fish there, but we're going to go over here, and I got, you know, spots over here too. But it's a wind-driven lake, a lot of shallow structure. Weed line, 12 to 14 feet in this. It's typically does not have a deep, real deep weed line in it. You go around right around that 12 to 14 feet. And this has a nice different kind of sand grass. There are different cabbage patches in there, you know, where it'll run. But the weeds aren't real thick on top, but it's more that, you know, sand grass, that's thicker sand grass that grows about this high, you know, where you kind of get snagged up, but it's not the real tall weeds unless you're, you know, find those real long, and then it's just cabbage. So put on there, walleyes can be in unusual spots, even in hot summer days. I've had clients in 90-some degrees, and we could be in 8 feet of water. Pelican Bay axis, probably one of my better guide trips, right out from the axis, and I was just pulling a long line with crawlers and leeches, and we had a ball, and it was about 92 degrees, and very little wind. Don't know why they were there. We actually just kind of, we were on the break, and we went up there, and one of the guys happened to say, I got one. Didn't know what it was a walleye. Okay, well, let's work this a little more. I got one, and it was, you know, I'm not talking it was this quick, but it was 150-yard stretch of a troll and back. It just, you know, it was like, okay, light bulb went off for me, so rig up, we're taking off those, you know, 1/8 ounce sinkers, 1/2 ounce sinkers, we're putting on split shots, and we're line lining these babies. And it was unbelievable. So that's why I put in it, it's crazy. Obviously there might have been some bait up there, but methods, jigging. I run jigs a long time. I say well in July, and I jig with people, and I jig those flats, and I right along the edge, 12 feet, 14 feet with clients, and to me, when you're jigging, when they feel that, I mean, it's a reaction. But that split shot, that method, you don't hear a lot of guys. You know, I'll come down there, and when we won the Scotts tournament, that's actually kind of what we wanted on. But my partner, Jim Click, if anybody knows him, anyways, when I pulled out and I was whacking those with him, he's like, what? And you're using that? And I think it's a lost art. You know, when I was little, my dad used to use it, and I went away from it for years. And, you know, it's just one of those things. Bring it back out of the hat. Hook color, clients. Red, gold, blue, could be a green. That's how we start the day. Okay? Could be a regular color, or just a natural, or the plain, you know, no color to it. That one's getting the bites, you're all changing. It matters, you know. I don't know, you know, there's a lot of different people, and there's people who say it doesn't matter. You know, when you got 3 or 4 people in your boat, and you got those lines down at the same time, and that person's getting it, it isn't because of the wiggle, I don't think, but I'll change out and people start catching fish. I mean, that's just kind of what you do as a guide, but you want everybody to catch them. It doesn't take me long, they'll get 2, and then the other one's got that color on.
So do you run beads or do you not run beads?
Beads typically on otter tail, chartreuse bead. West Battle red, you know, chartreuse on the pines, just brighter colors.
Do you match the bead color to the hook color? Do you have them contrast?
No.
You have 'em
Most of the
contrast.
time on ottertail, I don't have a bead. I have better luck without beads on ottertail. Red bead on West Battle, big and little pine chartreuse. So no bead. I call it no disco. So no disco on it. So that's just straight, you know. But I definitely change up those colors of the hooks, and that could be very. When I go home after I got the clients and everything, when I go home, I change them out again. I have different colors. Whoever, if I got 3 in a boat, they're going to be 3 different colors. And you know, it could be. Some days, yes, it doesn't matter, but I'm trying it every time. Gradual breaks in spring. In the spring, typically on ottertail, the gradual breaks are better, not the real sharp ones. Okay? When there's a very long, you know, kind of gradual that goes to deeper water, you can find them. If you look on your contour maps, you can see that. You can see how it's spread apart. Sharper breaks around July through fall. Sharper breaks get better. I would assume that comes from, what my theory is that, you know, they could sit there, they need to get it, you know, it's hot out, they need to get that cooler water, it's right there. So it's a nice sharp break. Fish are schooled up more in May and June, then spread out, school back up in fall. You see that a lot of the, you know, lakes. Small fish seem to school together. Now when I say that, if you out there as much as I do, typically when I'm going through 12 to 14 inch fish, that's what's happening the whole time. Okay? This lake, for some reason, is those small fish seem to school together. You can go on humps, and that's what you're going to get all day. You might catch 30 walleyes, but they're like cookie cutters, every one of them. Okay? Some clients love it. They can't get enough of it. But, you know, more than none, especially if you're a tournament fisherman, my suggestion would be get out of there, because you're not going to get a fish, a quality of fish you want. But for me as clients, you know, I got to change mindsets between guiding and tournament. But when you're out there as much, I can keep these people on this fish and they'll have a ball and they're catching fish, but it won't work for tournaments for me. It just won't do it. But those small fish seem to school together on this lake. And they all seem like they all swam out and they grew up together, and that's the way they are.